We're on the mission on Kuf Lamed Hey Yomid Beis. So first, we're going to be talking about the din of a. This is the next. Now we're talking about a matnas shchiv mira. So we have to understand the first thing we have to understand about a matnas shchiv mira is that it's not. It doesn't really work. Medaraisa, a matnas shchiv mira is where a person who's dying, he makes a deathbed bequest. He says, "I want something to go to this person or to that person." And you can't really make a kinyan just by saying something. But the Chachamim, in order, I don't remember exactly what the explanation was, either because we don't want to upset him, or I think it's because we don't want him to be fatumult about either he's dying and he also has to now go get lawyers and write up shtaris and make kinyanim. So they allowed him to make such a deathbed will, a deathbed bequest. And this works. The way it works is if he says that when he's dying, it works, but it takes effect after he dies. Zok the mission. Misha Mes, someone who died, v'nimtzes daitiki kishura al yurecha. And we find a daitiki, which is the Gemara is going to explain is a form of a contract or a will, and it's tied to himself. It means it's mamish. We know it's 100% that he wrote it. That's what the Rashbam says. So we know he wrote it. Harezu eneklum. This is not going to work. He managed to make things. He never made a verbal request. He never made a verbal declaration that he wants to be makna. Let's say this sada to Reuven. Let's say Reuven is the one who's dying, and he writes. He has a daitiki, which is we're going to say is a way of saying a star or a star that's intended to bequeath some property to someone else. So it says on it, I want to give this sada to Shimon. But let's see the Rashbam, he explains daitiki. The Rashbam, daitiki star tzavos shchemira. It's a tzavo from a shchemira. Kedarish lebegamara dot tehela mekim v'lias. It's a nutrican of the words dot tehela mekim v'lias. This is what I want my standing request to be, that it should take effect after I die. Al yurechai, and it's a tie to him. It's not talking about where we have any doubts about the genuineness of this star. So Rashbam says, "Harezu eneklum shafilum hizik achar misa ba'osei hashtar." Even if Shimon gets his hand after Reuven's death on the star, osei shenichtaloi hamtana, hamatana, that's written in it, this matana loy kani. Shimon is not going to be kaina. Dakav the tzavos shchemira kaina la'achar misa, even though oral bequest of a shchemira is kaina la'achar misa, hani mikadesh loy titrav daitelo. That's in order that the shchemira should not get upset. But to make a star, the star is not as strong as his actual handing it over. If he wrote a star, he's made things worse. It's a strange thing, right? Normally, a star is better than saying, I want to do something. But this person is trying to do the substance of the matnas shchemira, but through a star. And the Tacham not misakin that a star works like a matnas shchemira. Now, as we'll see in the Gemara, you can use a star to memorialize the matnas shchemira. There is such a thing. You can use it as a raya that you did give a matana. But if you're intending to do it through the star, that's not going to work. Because then we'll say maybe because if he wrote in the star, maybe he was depending on the star to be the thing that does the hakna. Okay. Because right, you can't make a star. The reason why star doesn't work is because it's a matana la'achamisa. There's no such thing as giving a matana la'achamisa midaraisa. The Chacham misaken specifically for shchemira that he can give it before misa, and it should take effect after. But if you try to do that with a star, it's not going to be effective. Sagt the Mishnah weiter. Zika ba la'achar. If he was mezaka, if he gave the star to someone before he died, and it doesn't make a difference. The Mishnah says a huge chiddush. Bein min yarshim, bein she'ein min yarshim. He gives it to someone um, who is not even the person who's named in that star. The star says, "I'm Reuven giving this to Shimon, that it should be a matnas daitiki. It should take effect after my death." We're going to have to explain what was the case. Because he said, we're talking about over here where he said it as well. And he also gave over the star to be a raya that he said it. So in that case, Zika Balach, if he gave the star and he said, I want you to have possession of this karka, but the Bein Yarshim, where it's one of the Yarshim Dvar Kayam, it works, meaning even if the star says, I am giving this property, this Sada to Shimon, and he takes that star and he hands it to Levi, and he says, I want you to be Zoicha in the Sada that's said in the star. In that case, the kinyan is happening from what he's saying. The star is just intended to be a raya. So the kinyan will still happen as a matna shemira, because the basis of a matna shemira is that when someone's dying, he's allowed to make a verbal declaration that he's giving something. That's what he did. The fact that the star says a different name doesn't detract from his intended bequest to the recipient.
Now, who's it going to? To the person in the star, or to the person that he gave it to?
The person he gave it to. Because that's the main thing of a matna shemira, is the person that he's saying I want to be makna to. And in a way, it makes sense if you think about it. The same way the star is not going to be enough on its own, it's not going to be enough to mess up what he's doing, that he's doing the correct way by giving it over and saying, I want to be makna, this karka, this property. Talking about Tanraban. Ezuhi daitiki. What does this mean? Daitiki kol shekosabo dot tehela mekim v'lias. This is what I want to be standing. These are my standing instructions. The Rashbam clarifies it doesn't mean that you actually have to have this lashon. This is a description of what a daitiki is. Wherever it says, wherever you leave standing instructions, is a daitiki. Be'ezi matana. What's a matana? Kol shekosabo mehayoyim l'achamisa. Whenever he writes mehayoyim l'achamisa. So this is a little bit misleading because the Gemara doesn't really explain what this means. But in the next Amud, on Amud Aleph, the next Amud Aleph, we're going to have a Mishnah, and there's a full Gemara that's going to explain that this is talking about someone, when he says mehayoyim l'achamisa, we interpret that to mean that he's giving over the corpus, the guf of the karka, to the recipient, but he's retaining the peiros for himself. So the mehayoyim is taking effect that mehayoyim, the person has the guf of the karka, but the giver is retaining for himself that he wants to still have the peiros. That's the la'achamisa part. And la'achamisa, then the recipient will get the peiros as well. So that's Be'ezi matana kosher b'hayoyim la'achamisa. Talking about b'hayoyim la'achamisa u'da have a matana me'achshav lo ya matana. It's mashma that the only way a person can give a matana is if he says that lashon. But if he says just I'm giving a matana now, it doesn't work. Certainly, person can give a matana. What does it mean? What does it mean that you can't give a matana now? You can give a star, and you give a matana with a star. So what are we saying? That you have to say mehayoyim l'achamisa. Amar by hakikama ezu hi matana beri shika matana shemira delikani l'achamisa. What has an aspect, a type of kinyan that is similar to the matana shemira, that a deathbed request that a person makes verbally that takes effect after his death. And normally, a person cannot be makna anything after his death. You don't have the ability. A person cannot do any transactions once he's dead. So therefore, if you try to delay a transaction to take effect after your death, it normally won't work. The only way it works, only if you do this particular circumstance where a person makes a shtar and says, I'm holding on to the Paris and I'm giving over the guf, and that will work because since he's giving the guf, that can take effect. He's giving the guf from now, and then I guess the reason it works is sort of that the Paris automatically flow to him when the mace is no longer around. So then it's freed up to go to the person who it's caught. But there's no restriction that because it's happening lachamisa, it can't work, since he already has the guf karka. So this is similar to the din of a shchemira. It's just a we're saying stylistically, this is similar to the ma'an shchemira, but it's obviously not. It's not the same thing. Yosef Rabba bar Rav Huna b'achsadra debei Rabbi. Yosef become mishmei Rav Yochanan. Rabba Rav Huna was saying b'shem Rav Yochanan shchemei rasha amar kisvu utnu mana leploini umeis ein kais v'vinois. If a shchemei says, I want you to write a star and give with that star give a mana to someone else, and before it was done, the shchemei died. Ein kais v'vinois. You don't write it and give it. Since he said kisvu utnu, if he's a shchemira, so all he had to do was say give it. And if he would have said give it, einachanami, it would have gone through. But because he was, maybe he was a lawyer, and he said, I'm going to do belts and suspenders, I'm going to say kisvu utnu, and therefore his intention was that he wanted it to be done kisvu with a star. But if he wants it to be done with a star, it doesn't work because the star can't happen. You can't make a kinyan with a star, or you can't make a star that will be kind of after misa. Misa. Amul Rebbe Elazar is daruba. Elazar says this is the halacha, and Yitaka have to be known like this. One has to keep in mind that although there's a ma'anash chemira, if he says kisvu tnu, it's not going to work. Rav Shizbi Amar Abba Elazar Amra. Rav Shizbi has the opposite version of who said what. He says Rabbi Elazar was the one who said this din. Amalei Rabbi Yochanan is daruba, and Rabbi Yochanan was the one who said this is taka da halacha. Amrachim Yitzchak Kavasa Rav Shizbi mistavra. The second version is more likely correct. If Rabbi Elazar was the one who originally said it, it makes sense that Rabbi Yochanan would back him up by saying that's the halacha. He was backing up Elazar. If Rabbi Yochanan was the one who originally said it, it's Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi. Rabbi Yochanan was the Rebbe of Rabbi Elazar. It doesn't make sense that Rabbi Yochanan would state something and then Rabbi Elazar would say, his Talmud would say, what my Rebbe said is correct. That would not be covered, and it wouldn't be, there wouldn't be no reason to respect it. So it must be Rav Shizbi is right that Rabbi Elazar was the first one to say it, and Rabbi Yochanan said he's correct. And another raya that this is true, that the Rabbi Elazar was the one who said it. Tashma, the Rabbi Elazar said it. The Shalach Ravin Mishmei de Rabavo. Ravin said B'Shem Rabavo. Habi Yoidim Sheshalach Rabbi Elazar l'Goyla. You should know that Rabbi Elazar sent to the Golos Mishum Rabbeinu. They said B'Shem Rabbeinu, I guess B'Shem Rabbi Yochanan. Shchemei Rasha Amor Kisvu Tnu Manal Pliny Meis Ein Kais V'Nois and Shemalei Gamalak Nois El B'Shtar. Ve'Ein Shtar La'acham Misa. That Rabbi Elazar was the mandam who said this memra that if a shchemei said kisvu tnu and he died, we don't follow through because maybe he was trying to do it with a star and that doesn't work. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Tibade. Rabbi Yochanan said about this, you have to look into it. It's not as straightforward as he said. This is slightly little different than what we said before. Before we said Rabbi Yochanan said Allah is like it, and now he's saying you have to be baidik. But as the Gemara is going to explain, Rabbi Yochanan was saying, it's not saying the halacha is not like that. He's saying you have to look into the circumstances. Under some circumstances, kisvu tnu would work. Mighty badik. He also Rav Dimi Amar. Rav Dimi said, he said a couple of halachas. First of all, he said, daitiki mevateles daitiki. If a person left over a daitiki, and l'chayr it has to be talking about that it's a daitiki that that was given to the person before he died. We said in the Mishnah, the daitiki that was found after his death, attached to him, even no matter what, it's not going to work. We're talking about when he gave it, but then he wrote a second daitiki to say that, you know what, I changed my mind. Instead of I want it, but while he was still alive, before, I don't want it to go to
When does the daitiki work? In other words, if he writes it, but the kinyan is before Misa, that's the only time. That's, in other words,
yeah, only if he gave it to the person before Misa. But if he gives it afterwards, like if it's left afterwards, we say, like we said in the Mishnah, like the Rashbam said, since he wrote it as a star, we're worried about that he meant to make it a star la'achamisa.
so then when does it work?
I guess when he gives it over and he says, it probably was a kisvu tnu.
But that we said it doesn't work.
I'm saying when he not like, I'm sorry, not kisvu tnu. When he says, I'm giving it over and I want you to be kind, and this is the raya that you're being kind of.
It's kind of the guf, but not the Paris.
I'm not.
I'm just trying to figure out when it
That's a
daitiki work.
matana. Yeah, I
So
mean,
then-
it's a problem.
Because the Gemara doesn't seem to, it kind of like there's obviously we it seems like we know as a like in a that
Yeah.
daitiki will work, but
Yeah.
doesn't explain when it does. Just tells you when it doesn't so far.
This is the Gemara later on, I think, is going to explain exactly how this is working. Because if we're talking about where he gave it beforehand, then l'chayra, you're right. If he handed it over, it's hard to understand why he can. With our Mishnah says that it doesn't work altogether. And if he handed it over, why does it work? And if it does work, why can it be chayzer on it? I think this is a Gemara later on that's going to go through. It's a while later, in a couple of weeks, that goes through how this works, what the case is. But in any case, this is not the point. This is not the issue over here, because we're just bringing this is the first din that was brought from Rav Dimi, and the second din. It depends on how it was written. If you wrote kisvut, if the man said the Shchemira said kisvut nu, if he wrote it in a way that was trying to improve the position of the person he was giving it to, then you do taka write it and give it. Even though we said we've been unanimous in saying there's no such thing as kisvut nu because you can't make a shtar chamisa. But if it was just written to make the person who's the recipient make his position stronger, then it works. The Gemara is going to explain what does it mean to be mi'afas koicha. Masav Rav Abba Bamal, Barisha Amal Kisvu Tmu Mana Plenu Meis Ein Kaisim V'Noisim. Hashchemera Kaisim V'Noisim. He asked that we say that a barrier who writes Kisvu Tnu, we don't listen to him. That's mashma. The Shchemera who does it, it does work. But how we've just brought all these shitas that say that even a Shchemera who says Kisvu Tnu, it doesn't work. Who Maisalahu Mafarkla, but Mi'afas Koicha. It's talking about, again, the case where Kisvu Tnu by Shchemira works is where it was written in a way to make his position better. What is that case? When he says, where they write this, we were makna it. The people who are writing, they're signing on the star say, the Edom say, we were kind of this karka on behalf of this recipient, Moisef al Matantada. And this was on top of the fact that the Shchemira gave it as a verbal declaration, that he made a regular Matna Shchemira. So if the Lashon of the Kisvu Tnu is that I want you to write something. Where they write, if they wrote if they write after he dies, they write that the person who gave it had already given the karka as a matnas chemira, and he told us to write also this on top of that, so he will have something to prove, to show that he had gotten it. So in this case, it's really a regular matnas chemira, just with an overlay that he instructed them to kisvu tznu to also write it. But it's not kisvu tznu instead of doing a matnas chemira. So hachanami da amar af ksuvu v'chasumu. So we're talking about over here where he said kisvu tznu. He said also he want ksuvu v'chasumu v'havule. After he said give them rights. I want to give this to Ruvain. I also want you on top of that to write it and sign it and give it to him. Itmar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha ksayvim kaisim v'noisen. V'chein Amar Rava Amar Rav Nachman halacha kaisim v'noisen. When you have such a miyafas koichai, then you can write and give the star by a matnas chemir. Okay, so now we're going to move on. Now we've been talking till now. The previous Mishnah talked about a matnas chemira. Now we're going to go back to what we had discussed on the previous summit, which is going to be basically the discussion over here is going to be the matana of a beria, where he gives the corpus, he gives the guf of the karka to the recipient immediately, but he retains the pairs for himself. So the Mishnah, someone who's healthy and he writes that he wants to he wants to give it to his children. He has to write if he wants it to work la'achamisa. He has to, meaning he wants to keep the peiros for himself. He has to write otherwise it's just a plain kinyan la'achamisa. If he doesn't say mehayim, but he just says la'achamisa, it's not going to work. He has to do that. It's going to be the gufa karkas coming to the ben mehayim. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Yossi says it's not necessary to say mehayim. If he says I want to be makna this karka la'achamisa, it's going to work. As the Gemara is going to explain, the Gemara is going to to make it less confusing. The Gemara is going to explain, since there's a date written on the star, it's evident, it's almost self-explanatory that he means mehayim. Clearly, it's not going to work la'achamisa. There's no one argues about the fact that you can't make a kinyan la'achamisa. But a healthy person, if he writes a star and he writes on the current date and he says, I want my son to be kainu, or it doesn't have to be a son, it could be anyone. I want him to be kainu la'achamisa. It's clear from the context that he means to say is la'achamisa, that I'm going to retain the peiros for myself. And I'm giving him the guf right now. If someone made taka such an effective kinyan, where he's giving the guf of the karka to his son immediately, but the father retains the peiros, it's a sensible thing if you think about it, right? This is every trust, everyone who goes to an estate lawyer. This is exactly what they're discussing. They're discussing how can I make sure the person I want gets what I'm giving him, but I don't want to pay inheritance taxes. That's the reason in secular law. So they say, I want to give it to him now, but I want to be able to keep the money. I want to be able to use it right currently. Let's go, for example, a house, right? Someone has a $2 million house in Marine Park, and he wants to continue living in it, but he wants to make sure his son has it. So he puts it into a trust that takes effect after his death. But in the meantime, he has the peiros, and his son has the. So that's what we're talking about. So someone did this. The father can't sell it. The father can't sell it because he doesn't own the guf of the karka. And the son can't do it because it's currently in the control of the father. The father's living in the house. He has the peiros. But when we say that he can't sell it, means he can't fully sell it. But if the father does sell it, it's sold. That means he sold it now, but all he sold is the peiros until the father dies. When the father dies, then the peiros don't belong to him anymore, and the son will fully own the house. So it's only a sale of the peiros as long as the father's alive. And the other way around, if the son sells it, he doesn't get anything until the father dies, at which point then he can get it. And he gets the entire karka. In the meantime, the father's entitled to live in the house. When the father dies, then the seller can get it. Zok the Gemara. The Gemara is now going to go back and explain what does this mean, how this works. I mean, I've been saying from the beginning, because otherwise it's impossible really to make sense of the Mishnah. But the Gemara is going to get to how we're talking about the peiros, that the father gets the peiros and the son gets the go. So when he says "Ma'ayom la'achamisa," how does that work? Katnan ma'ayom la'achamisa get, ve'ena get. If someone says, "I want to give a get that should take effect from today," and as well as la'achamisa, it's both a get and a get, meaning we don't know what he means. Does he mean when he says "Mehayom" that should be gereshus now, in which case it works, or does he mean la'achamisa, in which case it doesn't work? And the Gemara really, if you remember back from Gittin, it was more a question of when he says la'achamisa, is that a retraction of what he said? I wanted to make a get, and now he's saying I don't really want to give a get because that doesn't work, or does he just mean to say a t'nai that I don't want it to be if I die that I want it to be gracious now? But since it's a get and a get, but in any case, we see over there you can't have it take effect la'achamisa. So over there, it's a question like we just described of whether it's a t'nai or chazara. So we don't know exactly what he means. Over here, we have a way to explain it that makes sense, that without resorting to say that he was changing his mind, that he's making t'nai. But he's saying it's gufa kanim ha'yayim peir la'achamisa. Over here, we have the option of understanding it. He's trying to say, I'm giving the guf to my son immediately, but I'm retaining the peiros for myself. Rabbi Yossi says he doesn't have to say mehayim. In fact, Rabbi Ravu cholosh. Rabbi Ravu was sick. All Gabi Rav Huna Rav Nachman. Rav Huna Rav Nachman came to visit him. Amalei Rav Huna Rav Nachman. Boy minei halacha Rabbi Yossi and halacha Rabbi Yossi. He said, let's chop a Ryan. Rabbi Ravu is sick. Let's find out what the halacha is in our Mishnah. Do we pass him like Rabbi Yossi or not? Amalei time of Rabbi Yossi yadana halacha yibayim minei. We don't know the reason of Rabbi Yossi, even though I told it to you in the Mishnah. But at this point in the Gemara, we didn't know what his explanation was. Are we going to ask what the halacha is? First, we should ask what the reason is. You ask him, time is short. First, ask him what the halacha is. I'll tell you the time. We don't have time to spend in asking him what the reason is. He asked him, Allah is talking about Rabbi Yossi that it's not necessary to say mehayim. Basra did not go after they left. Amalei hainu time of the Rabbi Yossi. He came through and Rabbi Nachman told him Taka what the reason is. The Amar Zman Shtar Mechichalaf. Like we said, since it says a Zman in the Shtar, it says that it's from this day. So therefore, that itself understood that the Shtar means mehayim la'achamisa, that the guf should be kind of from today. Taninami hachi Yossi says it's not necessary to say mehayim. We have a brisa that explains it that way. What is the din where the shtar says, instead of saying that I'm being kinder with the shtar, it says that the edim were maknet, they were kainet, and the shtar is the raya. Right? That it's a raya, it's just memorializing the kinyan that the edim made. Amalei, I'm saying, meaning this question, this machlekes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, will it apply in that case as well? Do we say that it's going to still need to say mehayim? Even that which Rabbi, meaning really it's going to be the other way around. The machlekes is, does Rabbi Yehuda hold what he says that it has to say mehayim Well, that holds true even when it's a shtar hakna, when it's just a raya. That means since it's since the kinyan is happening from what the Adam did, it's coming from their Maisa kinyan. So a Maisa kinyan always happens at the time of the kinyan. So there's more reason to believe it happened immediately. The guf and since the shtar says this
The
right.
Kenyan happens from the Edom. I thought the Edom are just there was a Kenyan, and the Edom are just recording that there was a Kenyan.
No, we're talking about when the Adam made a Maisa kinyan.
They made
They
a
made a
Maisa.
chazaka. They made a. It was zeicha in it on behalf of the recipient.
Uh-huh.
A separate kinyan, not the kinyan of the shtar, a valid kinyan. And
And,
this,
then, and then there's a star that that made a Kenyan.
it says that that's what they did. So the
Right.
Maisa kinyan is even stronger than writing the date on the shtar when the shtar is the thing that's doing the kinyan, because a Maisa kinyan always happens immediately. But you also have the shtar that says it says Lamaisa La'achar Misa. So clearly, when he made the kinyan, there was a t'nai. So maybe Rabbi Yehuda is masking under those circumstances. Amalei bakna ain't it tzarich. He says ain't chanami. It's not going to be necessary. Rapapi ameiked aknisa the tzarich veik aknisa the leitzar. There are kinyanim that need, and there are those that don't need. It's going to depend. It's going to depend on the circumstances. Akanya v'kinyanim mine leitzar. Kinyanim v'akanya mine tzarich. So this is there's a complicated Rashbam of exactly what happened here. Do we have like a 5 minutes to go, a couple of minutes to go through? Let's look at the Rashbam. Akani v'kani mine loitza. Zeu shekoisim b'chol shtar shekosim by kinyan shnei kinyanim. Person writes two kinyanim. Echad b'tchilas asar v'kach amar. This is what it says at the beginning, and this is what it says. Chachamalanu havi alai edim v'kanu mimeni. The kismu v'chismu. The beginning it says that instructions that they should be kainit. Behind akanya shehikna edim b'kinyan suda liskos loyla b'kabel matana. The echad b'sayf ashtar v'kinyanim implini l'plini kechol ma'adekasa. At the end it says that they did as was instructed. First le'en. Damle kaman berk basha. Tzach sheyapsa minyana shostar b'shita achroina. Lookim kasa b'roisha shtar. Akanya ubeseifa kasa v'kinyana haini yifu koyach the mashma shnei kinyanim hakno v'gam anu kinyanim imenu v'kinyan yaseru yifu koyach eliknis. When he writes two times that beginning it says that you should be kainit, and then they say that they did it. So why do you have to say that they did it? They signed on it, and they did. Obviously, we have the star in front of it. So what do we have to say that they did as they were told to write the star and use it? So for the fact that we did an extra, it's basically almost like a yiter of a pasuk. We have an extra thing, something extra written into the star that indicates that it's coming to do something to make things better. And what's that doing? It's coming to say that it should take effect immediately. So that's going to be the case in which we say it takes effect immediately, even without having the lashon, like Rabbi Yehuda said, that you have to say mehayot. But if it's the other way around, then it first says that we did it, and then it says afterwards they were instructed. Since that's not an extra thing, because first it said that we did it. Afterwards, it has to say that we were instructed to do it. So therefore, at least that's the way the Rashbam explains it. Is there anything that the Rabban are not aware of? And clearly the Rabban were not aware of this nafkamina, that how to precisely to say the lashon of the shtar, and the Seifrim knew it. It doesn't make sense that the clearly the Seifrim don't know about it, and we don't know about it, so it doesn't make sense that there should be a nafkamina. Shalunu l'sifrei d'Abaya v'yadi l'sifrei d'Rabba v'yadi. But when he went and asked the Sefer about it, the Taka did know about it, so it wasn't an unfamiliar thing. Huna Breda Yeshua Amar Bein Akanya v'Kinyana Mine Bein Kinyana Mine v'Akanya Loy Tzarach. In either case, it's not necessary. The Ubeduchram Piskami the Havi Ba'ampa Pligi. We just the machlekes is only when the lashon was. This is where they say a lashon saying that this is this happened in front of us. The Havi Ba'ampana. These are the occurrences that happened in front of us, which is a lashon of recording, but without any lashon of kinyan at all. That's where we have the machlekes. But everyone will agree in the other where it says kinyana, that's extra, and that means that he intended it to be kani from immediately. Amar Kahana Risal Shmais Kamei the Rav Zvid, Na'adov Amli Etan Hachi Masinallah. Anan Hachi, you learned it like that. Anan Hachi Masinallah. Amar Rav Nachem, Bakna Ein Etzarach, Bein Akanya v'Kinyana Mine, Bein Kinyana Mine v'Akanya. Whether it was whichever order the two Lashonos were made, you're never going to need to have Mehayim because it's self-evident that there's an extra part in it. The only machlokes is where they said this lashon that didn't include any lashon kinyan. In that case, that's where Yehuda says you have to have a lashon Mehayim in order to make it that the gufa is kani immediately. Okay, we'll stop over here.
Thank you.
I expect to be on Zoom again tomorrow. Unfortunately, I got to whatever. I have to fill in a little over here in Lakewood.
Enjoy it.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye.
Go,
Thank you.
have a good day.